Hey, everybody. Welcome to A Mighty Blaze, our Friday Frontliner show. I am Jenna Blum, one of the co-founders of The Blaze, and today I am so excited to have back on The Blaze, Joyce Maynard, the legend herself. Welcome, Joyce.
It's great to be here, Jenna. I'm not really there. I'm in Paris, but
Joyce,
I'm with you in spirit.
No, you're actually with us on stream. You're with us in StreamYard spirit and also very much in book spirit. Joyce is like doing the above and beyond award thing tonight because she is joining us from Paris and she could be out like hanging out under the Arc de Triomphe drinking champagne or whatever.
Johnny really wanted to hang out with me at Cannes, but I said, Johnny, je ne peux pas le faire.
Priorities, Joyce, priorities. Thank you so much for like bringing your beautiful self to be with us tonight instead of going to Cannes. So for those of you who are repeat offenders at The Blaze, welcome back. Thank you for bringing your light to our Blaze. For those of you who are new here to see Joyce as I am. The Blaze is a team of 35 creative professional volunteers dedicated to helping writers reach their readers wherever they happen to be in the world and bringing you your favorite authors and their new books while you're sitting in your living room or wherever you are. We are not going to ask. You don't even have to wear pants to see your favorite writers. We are on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. We are ubiquitous. Please consider signing up for our newsletter at www.mightyblaze.com so you'll never have literary FOMO ever again. No mo.
And didn't I hear that you had a fundraiser going on, Jenna?
Yes, and as our producer just popped up, we had this fundraiser going on called Keep Blaze Lit. It just finished this morning, but I am happy to say that thanks to all of our writers and readers and viewers, industry people, everybody from publicists to editors to people who join us every week on every show, we smashed our goal. We smashed it. And so we are not going to only be lit, but growing. And so we can keep bringing you your favorite writers and new books for years to come, thanks to you. So thank you for mentioning that, Joyce. I did not pay Joyce to say that, but I'm really just so, like, I was so verklempt for the whole couple weeks the fundraiser was going on because I saw like who was donating and many people I knew and many people I did not. And it was just so heartwarming. Thank you for keeping us lit. And now, hi, Tori, one of the people who kept us lit, an author herself. Without further ado, I want to talk to Joyce about her novel, The Bird Hotel. But first, I'm going to introduce you to everybody who might have been living under a rock and has not heard already of you and your previous 18 books. So you ready for your bio?
I'm laying on me.
Okay, buckle up.
And I've forgotten who I am, where I am.
When I hear myself introduced, I'm like, who are they talking about? So see if this sounds familiar to you. Over her 50-year career, because she started writing long before she was born, New York Times bestselling author Joyce Maynard has published hundreds of essays as well as 18 books, both fiction and nonfiction, including the memoir At Home in the World, the novels To Die For and Labor Day, both adapted for film. Her novel Count the Ways, which was the last book I talked to you about here on The Blaze, which was a joy, was recently awarded the Grand Prix Littéraire in France, which I mispronounced. Every winter for over 2 decades, Maynard has led the Lake Atitlan Memoir Workshop, right by the lake in San Marcos, La Laguna, Guatemala. Her writing retreats take place at her hotel, Casa Paloma, where she wrote and finished a memoir and 4 novels, including The Bird Hotel, which we are here to talk about today. This is your newest masterpiece in your groove. I loved this book. I loved it so much. I love all of your books, and I have so many questions about your writing style and the way you enter into your world.
It's kind of a different one, though, isn't it, Jenna? It's this one. First of all,
why do you say this? I'm curious.
It's well, I tend to be. I'm sort of known for kind of very US based, never identified mysterious kind of magical Central American country, although the central character is a woman from the US.
Yes, we lost you for a little bit there. So you guys like bear with us if the connection gets a little spotty because again, Joyce is joining us from Paris where they're just like, le Wi-Fi, bleh. Anyway, so yes, I think that's right. Most of your books are US centric and there often is like a component of a mysterious Central American country. But Bird Hotel, tell us what it is about. Give us your elevator pitch, please.
Okay. Well, the main character is a woman named Irene. Already we've got a mystery because she started out as Joan, and for reasons that you'll discover when you read the book, her grandmother had to change her name when she was 7 years old. But Irene is an adult in her 30s, living in San Francisco, and a devastating personal tragedy occurs in her life. And again, I won't say what, that leaves her not really caring about whether she lives or dies. And she finds herself on a bus heading to, she doesn't even really know where, but she ends up, it's kind of a hippie bus, and ends up in this strange, magical little village at the hotel, at a falling down, dilapidated hotel run by an aging expat woman. When I say aging, she's probably the age I am now. And she's the only guest at the hotel. And she has no particular joie de vivre. Not only that, she doesn't really, as I said, care if she lives or dies. But she stays at this hotel because where else is she going to be? And again, for reasons that I will not disclose because I don't want to give any spoilers, she ends up running the hotel. And the book really tells the story of how she comes back to life, how she rediscovers joy in living in this very unlikely little indigenous community on the shores of a spectacularly beautiful lake surrounded by volcanoes.
That is a really beautiful. Sorry, go ahead, Joyce.
So no, it's kind of a fairy tale. It's a story that although always I believe in grounding my characters in human behavior that will be recognizable and that we can say, oh yeah, I knew somebody like that. But it's also a little bit of, it's probably the closest I'll ever come to magic realism, this book. And it's a bit of a fable. I wrote it in, I think it's 102 chapters. And I wrote it during the early days of the pandemic, when I was myself living in a Central American country that I will name, Guatemala, where I've had a life for well over 20 years now. I had come, and I'd actually love to tell you, if it's okay, Jenna, how I came to write this book.
Please, please.
So you mentioned that I've been hosting writing workshops, memoir workshops at Lake Atitlan for many years, over 20 years. I had come down, it was March of 2020, no explanation needed for what that meant, March of 2020. And I had no idea, my workshop was scheduled, 18 women were supposed to come down and work with me for a week. I had no idea if they would show up or not, but I figured I'd be there in case somebody did. And amazingly, 16 women made it as far as Guatemala City. And then the night after they arrived, the president of Guatemala got on TV and said, we're closing the airport in 3 days. And a bunch of the women went home, as did my chef, who had a job in the US and had to go home. But the amazing part was that 8 stayed. And no, he was a dear friend, but the 8 stayed. And we had this extraordinary time together, kind of hunkered down, making our own rice and beans and guacamole without the chef. And the workshop went on and on because there was no plane. Eventually a plane came, but I didn't want to go home. I really knew that where I was in my house on the shores of this beautiful lake, in a whole giant garden with fruit trees and orchids and birds, was the best place I could be at the moment. And I invited 2 young women, the 2 youngest women in my workshop, to stay with me, thinking we'd be together for a few weeks. We were there at that house by choice, knowing it was a good place to be for 6 months. And the first thing I did was, and I actually have to say, I think back on those 6 months as probably one of the best times in my entire life. I finished my novel, Count the Ways, then. They each embarked on projects. One was a musician and she was recording bird songs. The other was making a podcast about immigration. But I used to read out loud to the girls from Count the Ways every night under the stars by looking out at the lake and the volcano in the dark as the world, had closed down around us. And when I finished Count the Ways, the pandemic was still going on. We were still there. And they said, come on, we need a new book. And this was the book I wrote really for Shiren and Jenny as a kind of bedtime story for them. I would read out loud every night, and every morning they'd rush me up to my little writing cabin and say, "Go write another chapter. We can't wait to see what happens next." And you know why there were 102 chapters. We were there a long time.
Oh my gosh, that is the most miraculous origin story for a book.
It really was. I really felt, as a writer, I don't need to tell you this, Jenna, it's very lonely, and it's rare that we get to actually experience human contact with a reader. Almost never when we're writing. But every night I wrote, and I had these two girls just sort of sitting by the edges of their chairs, waiting to see what would happen next. And I thought very much about them. So there's Shiren was born in China. There's an Asian character who checks into the hotel. Jenny was from the UK, so I included her favorite football team. When I say football, of course, I mean soccer. And I was entertaining us. And, I think the best way to write a book that other people will love is to be writing one that you're loving to hear yourself. And you can't wait to know what happens next. And that was true of this one.
It's funny, it reads like a typical Maynard novel in that it has these beautiful short chapters that are almost like prose poetry, except not opaque. Sometimes I think prose poetry is like a little bit too much poetry and not enough prose. But these just
I really believe in being clear. I want you to get my story. I don't ever write down to a reader. If there's one thing I've learned from 50 years of publishing my work and hearing from readers, it is respect for the reader's intelligence and perception. So I need to explain less and less. But I want to write. I'm not trying to prove how many adjectives I know or what great similes I can come up with. I wanted to tell a very organic story that was almost like a piece of oral storytelling, like sitting around the fire telling a story, which you
kind of were. I feel as though it is a hallmark it's a Maynardian hallmark that you do have these succinct chapters in all of your work. And I want to talk a little bit more about style a little bit later on. But this one in particular, it has also chapter titles, and you have this in all of your books as well. Each chapter has its own title. I'm just flip through this Morning, Overdue, A Good Place to Disappear. There's a great one about potatoes, How to Make Macarons, Shrimp as Big as Your Hand, I Remember Food. So if you put these together, and later in the book, one thing about having an operator for a friend. And I do this when I'm writing my own work. I will use a phrase from the chapter as a marker so that I remember what the chapter is about. But then I go back afterwards and simply give them numbers. And what I love about this is something that your work actually shares in common, with itself. Each book is like this, but this one has a particularly colorful, vivid, magical quality. And now we know why. So let me ask you, if I may, about, I think it's so extraordinary that you wrote this on kind of a break from your regularly scheduled life. You have a very peripatetic life, as I do. You're always traveling, but you took a break and became grounded in this place. And Irene/Joan comes to Earth at the hotel because she's had a break in her own life that is kind of a soul fracture. She has a terrible, terrible grief that totally unmans or unwomans her and sets her afloat from the typical map of her life. And she literally gets on a bus, doesn't care where she's going, and it carries her by various conveyances all the way to this hotel where she sort of floats to Earth. And then, as you said,
good description.
Beautiful. And I'm wondering, as somebody who has experienced a great grief of your own, do you think that these kinds of griefs make those changes in life possible? Are these big changes a strange gift of grief, if you will?
They have for me. I mean, I've been wiped out a few times. I could name, a few very discernible moments when I was 19 years old, and the person I thought I would be with forever, who happened to be a very powerful, compelling person, much, much older than I. If you've read At Home in the World, you know that story. Sent me away with two $50 bills in my hand and said, disappear. My marriage ended when I was 35, and it was another devastation of sort of feeling like, who am I anymore? My mother died that same year, actually. And many years later, I made a very good second marriage to my husband, Jim. And a year after we were married, when I was, I guess, 61 and Jim 62, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and died 19 months later. That's, if you read my memoir, The Best of Us, that's the one that explores that story. But I think it doesn't always happen, but I'm a pretty resilient person, and I have not chosen, and it is a choice, I think, to be crushed by loss. I remember feeling very strongly when Jim was dying that there something I needed to to honor what he and I had gone through together. And that would be a book. And Jim, actually, the French title of The Best of Us in English is One Day You Will Tell This Story, which was something that Jim said to me as he was dying. Un jour tu raconteras cette histoire. That's what I know to do with sadness, is to write about it. It doesn't mean there has to be sadness to be a writer, but most of us haven't. And I want to make something of meaning out of something that could otherwise be just a mess, just pain. Pain isn't a very fruitful thing to hold on to. So I'll say this will sound pretty presumptuous. I want to aspire to making art out of pain.
I think that is a gift not only of grief then maybe, but of writing, because it is a peculiarity of writing which offers many peculiarities, and many of them are sort of awful, like loneliness or isolation or deadlines or whatever. But one great thing is whenever anything really awful happens to you, you can make it into your work. And I have an affirmation app I use every night, and I keep getting this affirmation that says, someday you will write what happened to you and it will be somebody else's survival guide. And so I feel as though The Best of Us and The Hotel are great examples of that. Do you think, because you were talking about the origin story of the book being the pandemic, do you think the pandemic gave us all an opportunity to sort of reinvent ourselves in the way that Irene does in The Bird Hotel?
I try not to speak for anybody else, but certainly, and I won't presume to, obviously people faced devastating loss and tragedy, and it's too easy for me to say, as a person who found herself in paradise, sort of in a shutdown world with my laptop, and mangoes to pick up the trees, I won't say, oh yeah, everybody should have made something great out of the pandemic. Many people couldn't. But for me, there were many gifts. That's for sure. It was actually really hard to re-enter the world after that time. We would, in Guatemala, as I said, I had my house there for years. And one of the great things there's so many great things about Guatemala, but there are these markets where they sell piles and piles of used clothes that have come from the US. Sometimes brand new clothes from somewhere like Neiman Marcus just get dumped. And so I owned ball gowns. I had all these things that I bought for 50 cents over the years that were like sequin and, crazy clothes that I really had no occasion for. And those nights during the pandemic when I read The Bird Hotel to, I call them the girls, they were 32. We dressed up. We wore gowns. We lit candles. We put on our gowns. We cooked ourselves a wonderful meal, and there were very hard things happening in the world. But I'm not particularly a believer that because there are hard things going on in the world, we should not still do our level best to try to find something good and make something of what we have.
Finding joy among the rubble, if you will. right?
And I also want to add at this point that because sometimes, as you know, I teach writing. I teach memoir workshops in Guatemala. I'm not affiliated with some university, but I do this, a few times a year at my home in Guatemala. And every now and then somebody will come to the workshop and she'll say, I have a terrible problem. I've had a really happy life. I mean, problem as a writer, I have no giant traumas. Is there any hope for me as a writer? And of course I say, yeah, it's wonderful to, hear a happy story well told. I do actually believe that if we really examine our lives, we are likely to find, some dissonance and trouble, but it doesn't have to be, some horrifying event of, abuse or death or trauma or addiction. A story can be a very small, beautiful story or a huge one. Maybe if this sounds okay to you, maybe I'll read a page from Bird Hotel now.
I would love that. I was going to invite you to do that towards the tail end of this. Please. Yes.
I don't have the book with me, and so I have to just read from my phone, but I'm going to do that right here. I had it all teed up, and here it is. Okay, so I'm reading from my phone. This is chapter 1 of the Bird Hotel, and the chapter happens thing about hard times. I was 27 years old when I decided to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. One afternoon, I had this great life. Half an hour later, all I wanted was to be dead. I took a taxi. It was just after sunset when I reached the bridge, rising up through the mist, that wonderful shade of red I had loved back when I still cared about the colors of things and bridges and getting to the other side of them. Back when I cared about so many things that now seemed meaningless. Before leaving my apartment that last time, I'd stuffed a $100 bill in my pocket. I gave this to the driver. Why wait for change? There were tourists, of course, traffic heading in and out of the city, parents with children in strollers. I used to be one of those. A boat was passing under the bridge. From where I stood, preparing to jump, I watched it make its way under the pilings, men mopping the deck. Nothing made sense anymore. I'd been dimly aware of an elderly man watching me. He might try to stop me, so I waited for him to move on, and after a few minutes, he did. Only I couldn't take that last step up onto the railing over the edge. One thing about hard times, Lenny had said once, when our rent check bounced the same week, Arlo got sent home from daycare with head lice, and I came down with mono, and a pipe burst in our apartment that destroyed a stack of drawings I'd been working on for 6 months. Once you hit bottom, things can only get better. Standing on the bridge, looking down at the dark and swirling water, I think I recognized something about myself. Even though the place in which I now found myself was terrible, some small part of me couldn't let go of the world. The fact of grieving a vast loss as I did had to serve as some kind of reminder that life was precious, even mine. Even then, I stepped away from the railing. I couldn't do it, but I couldn't ever go home either. I had no home anymore. This is how I ended up at the Bird Hotel.
I am clapping for everybody in the audience. I know it's clapping. It's such a chapter that pulls you in from the very first line, which we talk about in my own writing workshops as being so difficult to do. And it's so vivid and it's so elegiac. It's a beautiful piece of writing, and all of the chapters are like that. I want to offer like a reading that I don't know if you do this, but I dog ear the corners of books when I really love I don't know if you can even see this, but I've been flipping up the bottoms of the pages for lines that I love.
I remember saying this last time. I love it that you do.
I totally do, and I love to do this and then not mark what line I loved, and then I go back through the book to like try and remember which line it was, and I always remember. But in this book, I have like the bottom of almost every page turned up because there's a beautiful line in almost every page. And I'm going to do a dueling reading with you from the chapter, which is called 672 Varieties of Birds, not to mention Fireflies, because guys, this is what, and you should be putting this book in your cart by like the handful right now. Because it's just like every chapter offers some gem that is like this and like what Joyce read. Here's one that really struck me that I will return to over and over again. We were sitting on the terrace with our coffee, finishing dessert of passion fruit ice cream and macaron. From across the water, a nighttime church service probably, I could make out the distant sound of bells, then singing. In front of us, lake water lapped against the rocks. Over the water, I observed something sparkling. First, just a single flicker of light, and then another, then more. Oh, good, Layla said. I knew the day was approaching. I was hoping I'd get to see them again. What was she talking about? It's the fireflies, she told me. They come out every year around this time. They put on the most amazing show for one glorious night and then disappear. It's probably a good reminder, nothing beautiful lasts forever. We need to take joy in what comes our way instead of mourning when it's over. And I feel as though that was kind of like a nut graph for the whole book in a way. It reminded me a little bit.
Yeah. There are, in fact, the country that I make up in the novel is a product of my imagination, as is the hotel. But in fact, it's very much inspired by the place where I have lived part-time for, as I said, many years, where there are these magical nights when the fireflies come. I just had one a few weeks ago when I was in Guatemala. I move around quite a bit. And I wanted to convey, especially in that moment when things were so hard, what we can hold on to, which is the natural world, the beauty of the natural world. This is a very low technology book. There is, in fact, I think it's a no technology book. The hotel maybe eventually gets internet, but it's pretty much birds. In fact, I don't think I've ever put less music in a book. Usually I fill my novels with lots of the popular songs that people are listening to or dancing to or singing. This one is birds. It's bird songs. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I think on my website is a link to a Spotify playlist that she ran, one of the two girls created, of the birds of Lake Atitlan.
Oh, I love that. Can we talk a little bit about it? It's not like chosen family. It's like accidental family that then becomes chosen family, which now that I'm hearing about your story behind the story kind of mimics your experience of being sort of at first marooned in a beautiful place with other people who then have
Woodlands Island.
Yeah, exactly. It's Joyce's island, actually, Joyce's magical island. So can you talk a little bit about what happens to Irene in the book with the people she meets at the Bird Hotel?
Well, it's a motley crew. It's she's running a hotel. So we've got the hotel guests, first of all. It's a great, it's a great, I didn't choose it as a clever literary device, but I can always have somebody new check into the hotel. And then we've got the village, which is full of the indigenous people. And I want to say swiftly, I would never presume, and I say this partly because there's so much talk these days of a cultural appropriation and what are we allowed to write about and what are we not allowed to write about. I would never presume to appropriate the position of an indigenous person, but don't tell me that I can't write about being an expat woman in a country with indigenous people, Latinx people, French people, Israeli people, German people. I think you were talking earlier, Jenna, about, this book isn't like my other books, and you're right. Every time I write a book, I want to go out further. I don't want to be kept in a box and being told, I'll charitably call myself late middle-aged. You're an older white woman who grew up in New Hampshire, and those are the only stories you get to tell. No. And I would never want to put any other writer in any such box either. And, as you know, there's been a big debate going on that really questions whether, and in fact questioned, I'm speaking now of the publishing world, you know, there were many quarters that said I didn't get to write a book set in Central America. That really alarms me for the future of publishing, because writing books is fundamentally about imagination. We may do it well, we may do it poorly. I certainly aspire to doing it very well. And in the case of Guatemala, I think my credentials are pretty solid that I've had a life there for a long time. I don't usually do research. My life generally is my research. But when the day comes, let's look at the books in, you know, the history of literature that would not exist if writers were confined to, you know, their own heritage, their gender. Memoirs of a Geisha, that wouldn't be there. Anna Karenina. So I loved putting myself in a place where all kinds of characters were going to come. I'd never before had an Asian character in a book of mine. And again, I could probably only have done that because I was living with an Asian woman who really schooled me well. In the small, she's not a major character in the book, but as is true of our lives are populated with people from all over. Don't we get to include them in our stories? My last book, Count the Ways, had, again, not as a central character, but an important one, a transgender person. I'm not transgender. I'm not the mother of a transgender person. I certainly know transgender people and know mothers of transgender people, and worked very hard to inform myself well without writing from that perspective. But I think it's really important that we venture forth into the world and try.
Our friend Bozina said, "Don't people become writers to become anybody they wish?" And I think it's so true. It's such a tricky and delicate debate right now. But I have long said that if we were only going to write from our own experience, we would all be writing memoir or autobiography. And writing fiction is a leap of imaginative empathy. Vi said, "I'm so reluctant to let Joan/Irene leave my thoughts. I love this character so much. I will never forget the lovely dinners at the Bird Game." Thank you for that comment. Joyce, can you tell us a little bit about, I fell in love with this book also, and Irene falls in love in the book too, but at least initially, she falls in love with place, which I think is, and so does Layla, her benefactress, who we heard a little bit about in the Firefly passage that I read. Can you tell us about place and sense of place? And did you ever fall in love with a place at first sight?
Oh, I have done it many times. That's probably one of my obsessions. I've written many times about a farm at the end of a dead-end road in New Hampshire. Well, that was my farm once. I lived on that farm. And Count the Ways, my last book, is a work of fiction, but the family in Count the Ways lives on that farm, basically. I know every inch of that farm. I love Guatemala. I love Paris. I'm sure at some point I'll situate something in Paris. And the Bird Hotel was a fictional place that I fell in love with. I'll tell you a funny thing that happened, though. It started out being fiction and it became less fiction. So, as I've mentioned, I've had a rather simple little home initially on the shores of this extraordinarily beautiful lake, really one of the most beautiful places on the planet, I believe, surrounded by volcanoes. I really recommend people go there. The US State Department has a warning about Guatemala on its website. Don't believe them. You could just as easily warn about, you know, Oakland. Anyway, so I've lived in that house and I've hosted workshops. Women came to the workshops and always would stay in a simple little inn in the village and come to my house every day to work with me. And that's how it was until the pandemic. And then while I was writing this book, there actually was no discernible COVID in my village, but there was another terrible problem, which was unemployment. It is a village that is an interesting mix of very traditional indigenous culture, people growing corn on the sides of the hills and women carrying sticks on their head and weaving fabric for their clothes. And it's a gringo tourist culture. It's people from all over the world, kind of hippie travelers. The hippie travelers, all the travelers disappeared. people had no jobs and no safety net. And so I decided to do a few modest little building projects just to give people jobs. So the first one was that I put a new roof on my house and I built a retaining wall. And the pandemic was still going on. I could never have afforded to do this in the United States of America, but I had a crew of 20 men showing up every day at my house to work. And they were so grateful for the work, and they so preferred that to, handouts from well-intentioned gringos saying, I'll give you money for, a bag of corn. So I couldn't stop building. I became kind of just driven to keep these men employed. And so I kept building new little houses on my property. The property was actually substantial, and I built a little guest house. It turned out beautiful. Of course, there's no building permits. I designed it carefully and it's very solid, but it was a wonderful project for the men. And then I thought, okay, that's finished. The pandemic's still on. We'll design another little house and build that. In the end, over the course of those months and beyond, we built 5 new houses on my property. And suddenly I realized I hadn't kind of thought this through. Oh my gosh, if I've spent every penny I have in the world building little houses on my property, I better fill those houses. So what used to be my simple little writing retreat on the shores of Lake Atitlan actually did become the Bird Hotel. It wasn't my plan while I was writing this book. I just kept typing away and making up this hotel. And a year later, I realized I made a hotel. And now it is, I have to say, it doesn't function as well as a writing retreat because I'm very busy running this place. It can house 20 people. There are nights when every one of the houses on the property is filled with guests, and there's a yoga platform, and there's a sauna, and there's 2 different docks and kayaks and stand-up paddleboards and many, many gardens and a chef. And so I do, in fact, run a hotel. I write books on the side.
Oh my gosh. And we can all come to this hotel. Am I right? And you are still writing retreats.
This conversation is really not about promoting my place. In fact,
but it's fascinating.
Because I don't have a problem filling it. But in fact, there's a story that I wrote about this. It's, I think, running in the New York Times next week. So I will say it exists. And if you go to my website, you'll probably see pictures of it.
Well, we all want to go now. Every single person watching this is going to come to your hotel. Never get any more writing books.
I think I'm kind of hotel/retreat center. I host retreats there, but I can't host retreats all the time because I do, in fact, write books. So it's a place for yoga teachers to come and host a yoga retreat or family reunions. We had a wedding there a few weeks ago. And I do get kind of wrapped up in, there are nights when I get involved in making sure that, somebody who lost their key gets in, or they need a massage scheduled or something. And sometimes it's my property manager, and every once in a while it's me.
Mm-hmm. I would like to suggest that you have a writing teacher come to your hotel and teach a writing workshop there for 4 or 5 weeks. Just saying, just a little suggestion that just occurred.
Oh, well, come down, Jenna. I do it. I think I hosted many more than usual. I think I hosted 4 writing workshops this year. But I encourage other writers. We now have a whole team sort of set up for that. So yeah, I love the idea of bringing people together and around a table. I'm building right now this wonderful long table that's enough for 20 people. And there'll be travelers from all over the world who come to my place and break bread together, which is what happens at my retreats, but not just at my retreats anymore.
I so love this story. Thank you so much. We were talking about running Blaze retreats, including at our friend Chuck's house behind the scenes.
Oh,
so hitting you up for that. This sounds like the perfect table.
I have the place for you. I have the place for you.
You certainly do. And I have to ask you, do you still make pies? Because I know that
I do. The truth is, I don't eat pie much myself. So I make pie when there are other people around. I don't make pie in Guatemala. It's not really a pie place. Paella, on the other hand. Yeah. We have a fabulous chef who cooks for my retreats and for most of the retreats and, the events that happen. She's an Indigenous woman. Rosa was a brilliant, brilliant chef. And so she makes many a fine dessert, but I don't do too much cooking there anymore.
And from pies to paella, the Joyce Maynard story.
Yeah.
So I have sometimes had the strange experience of being in the middle of writing a book, writing fiction, and then finding that I've written something into reality. But I have never heard of such a great intersection, like great interactionality between.
It was very inspiring, Jenna. I don't need to tell you as a writer. It's one of the great things, incidentally, about Mighty Blaze, that when you're on Mighty Blaze, you are talking with a writer. So they do understand this. I'm usually quite far removed from the whole process of, of course, I've earned my living as a writer, and I'm, not ashamed of the fact that I get paid for my writing. I'm proud of my work, but I don't usually have such a direct interaction with the marketplace. But while I was writing the Bird Hotel and the men were building, I would, at 7 a.m., sometimes 6:45, I would climb the hill with my cup of coffee and my mango to my little writing cabin on the property. And I would meet on the steps coming down the hill, the 20 men carrying bags of stone, carrying their shovels and their everything's hand tools. And as I was typing, I had this wonderful and unprecedented sense of connection between the work I did and the food that would be on their tables that night. And that's true. And I always say it to the people who come in to my workshops. You come to my workshop, somebody gets a job because of that. So I fell in love with building, I have to say. I became a building contractor, and every one of the little casitas is different. I don't have a favorite. They're named for my books. One is To Die For, one is Count the Ways, one is At Home in the World. There's one currently under construction that will be called the Bird Hotel.
Oh, love. And are they decorated differently? Is each one decorated?
Oh, gosh, yes. Yeah, I love the markets in Guatemala, but I'd run out of spaces to hang textiles and, carved stone things and, desks made of avocado trees. But every one of those casitas is furnished that way. So yeah, there's an artist. In fact, the cover of the Bird Hotel is a detail from a painting, a very large painting that I commissioned by a local Indigenous painter.
Oh, I love that. I didn't know that. It's a beautiful cover.
And I commissioned this painting it shows a volcanic eruption. And I asked him, I believe this painting someday will be in a museum. I'll make sure it is. I wanted him to record the history of Guatemala in paintings that I've commissioned. And this one tells the story of a volcanic eruption that happened in 2018. And it's no spoiler to say that if you've got a novel that is set on the shores of a lake looking out at a volcano, the real volcano that I look out at is in fact not active anymore. But in my novel, there's a volcano, and every good fiction writer knows if there's a gun hanging over the mantelpiece, someday it's going to be fired. And so we have a little volcanic action going on in this book.
It's a Jacobian principle. It has to be done. I have so many more questions. I know that we must have audience questions. Guys, this is your chance. You have Joyce Maynard here. If you have
I love hearing from readers. Please don't be shy.
Yeah, please read it. Like, this is the writer's favorite part, is to hear from readers, not necessarily from
others. Sure. The volcano in the first act must eventually blow. Allison, you got it.
And Allie, of course, is an award-winning poet, so we know this. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then we can go to audience questions. But Michelle had commented earlier, I spy numerous multicolored sticky notes. Oh, someone loves them as much as I do. Can you tell us about the sticky notes?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, I'm in Paris. I feel so incredibly lucky. I was, as many of you may know, there's a fabulous English language bookstore in Paris called Shakespeare and Company. And I met the owner, who is the daughter of the founder of Shakespeare and Company, at a festival, a literary festival last fall in Paris. And I told her that it had been a dream of mine since I was very young to one day do that thing that young travelers, writers sometimes do, still do, sleep in the bookstore, work in the bookstore, and write and study French. And I said, oh, I've always come to Paris, to promote my books. I'd love to just be in Paris and write. And she said, oh, well, let me give you an apartment. So I don't have my usual whiteboard that I have at home, which I scribble on like crazy while I'm structuring out. I never write an outline, and I have no idea how my novels will end. But I do write on my whiteboard, and I have lots of ideas, but I don't have the usual erasable whiteboard. So I recreated it here for the book that I'm writing with Post-it notes.
I love this. And do you, because I have Post-it notes in my study as well. And when I'm done with one, when I've written it into the book, I take it down and put it in a notebook. Do you do this?
Exactly right. I do the same. I have my collections. And normally at home, I don't use the sticky notes so much. I use, as I said, I use the whiteboard, but I take pictures of my whiteboards. And when I'm teaching, one of the first things I do with a student manuscript is I make a whiteboard for that student of the story that she's written and the story that will eventually come.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yep. It's like, I call this, and Chuck knows this because he was in my writing workshop, but we call it novelist math or novelist architecture. There's a whole, in the classroom when we were doing in-person classes, I would always diagram out the novel on the whiteboard.
Absolutely. And incidentally, I'm sure there are tools on a Mac that would allow you to do this on the screen, but I don't want to do one more thing on a screen that I can do in real life. I want to get up off my desk and move around and scribble and dance, and I don't want to be sitting here typing all day long. So it's a much more physical act. And as I said, I recognize the importance of technology in our lives, and it's certainly true for me as a writer, but I'm a kind of low tech person.
I have two comments about this. And the first one is like, thank God for some tech, or we wouldn't be able to be in Paris with you, listening to the sirens with you and talking to you. And at the same time,
thank you, Sarah.
Right. But I also want to go to like a dance party with you, Joyce. I think you would be really fun at a dance party.
I love to dance. The only problem for me is stopping dancing.
Yeah. That's, yeah.
And now in Guatemala, we have this fabulous yoga platform for the yoga classes, but it doubles as a dance floor, of course. So usually at my retreats, we do some dancing.
Okay, I love this. Very tactile retreats. You heard it all. I mean, like, this is partly about the Bird Hotel, and I do love this book, you guys. I really encourage you to get it, to do your own armchair traveling. Let me return to this for 1 second. So it reminded me of two other works of art that I loved a lot. And the first is Jodi Picoult's Wish You Were Here, which is about a woman who gets stuck in the Galapagos during the pandemic.
Wow, I haven't read that.
It's a little bit of a sister book in some ways, except in this case, Irene is there because of grief, not the pandemic. But your story reminds me a little bit of that, and how the dubious gift of being sort of lodged in one place changes a perspective on life. But this also reminds me a little bit of Under the Tuscan Sun. Like, do you guys remember this book /
Oh, long ago, yeah.
So this woman suffers a fracture in her life, and she goes to France and stays there and ends up restoring.
Or Italy. She goes to Italy, doesn't she?
Yeah, sorry, Italy. Yeah. Sorry, I obviously need more vodka from my Mighty Blaze mug. But so she ends up restoring this villa and employing people from the neighborhood, and it changes her life. It interacts with her own life in unexpected ways. Do you think this is kind of like a fantasy too that we have? It's not only a real experience now, but is it a fantasy to be like, I just want to leave my life and go do something totally experiential?
Well, I don't know if you leave your life. You take you leave the physical place, but by doing that, you discover aspects of yourself that you may not have developed. And I grew up in a very small town in New Hampshire. My family did not have the opportunity to travel, and I really knew that I wanted to see the big world, and that the world was not, that all I saw was the perspective of, I shouldn't say that because my mother was always a big thinking person who knew there was more, but yearned for it, and did take my sister and me on a train through Mexico for 6 weeks when I was 11 years old, in the 60s, unheard of. She first made sure that we learned Spanish from a book, that was all we could do in those days. And that opened up the world. So yeah, I don't know that it's not for me sort of escape, it's expansion. It's expansion. I guess in Irene's case, she has to put away something so painful. So yes, that is true. For me, I bring myself with myself wherever I go. And it's one reason that I can be in so many different places, because I'm always home. I have, a couple of items of clothing that I just sort of take with me, and I have some music on my laptop, and, I plug in my machine, and, 2 days later, I'm calling this apartment home, and somewhere else will be home, in a few weeks. Yeah.
One of the questions that we had coming in, I'm just going to pop this up. The audience question is, how does your travel lifestyle affect or feed your writing? Because you were just talking about having a sort of a movable home, like a home that you carry on your back. How does this?
I have to add that at some point one has to stay put too. I'm not somebody who can write for 2 days in a hotel room and then go on to another hotel. I need to settle in. And so when I go somewhere to write, I stay in one place. I had a glorious just few weeks at McDowell in New Hampshire this winter, when it was the coldest part of the winter, and snow was piled up. And that's actually where I finished the sequel to Count the Waves that's going to come out next week. So next year. Yeah. No, but I'm pretty good. Home is where I am, and the people I love may be or may not. I can talk to them anyway. But I'm pretty good at I'm pretty portable. It's the beauty of having this machine. I've been writing long enough that, it used to be a typewriter.
We have another audience question, which is, what is a fact about you that most people don't know? This is like a great drinking game question.
Okay, I'll tell you one.
Okay.
And I'm sort of known as this, some people call me an oversharer. I talk about a lot of things that many people don't. But until very recently, this is something I didn't talk about. And I actually do now for a very particular reason, because I'm aware that there will be other people hearing this who can relate. I have been a writer all my life. I am a passionate lover of language and stories. I have an enormously hard time reading. And I kept this secret for most of my adult life. I have many good friends who are writers, and they give me their books, and I get this kind of panic. Oh my God, will I be able to read this book? But I kept it secret, And then I went back to college. After my husband died, I did this sort of surprising thing, but actually it was great. It was a good choice. I needed to leave my home. And I went back to college. I had dropped out of Yale when I was 18 years old in 1972. I went back to Yale, same school, 48 years later at the age of 65. And the first semester I took many classes, not writing. I took history, all kinds of things, art. And I took a French class because I adore French, sort of mid-level French class. And I always kind of fancied myself as a pretty good French student. I was a good student. And I was taking my first exam in 48 years. I studied really hard. I stayed up late. I was pretty sure after I took the exam that I had done a good job. I loved my teacher. And the next day I went back to class, and all the exams were returned to the students except the one for me. And my teacher, Ruth, called me up after class, and she said, Joyce, I want to speak with you. And first she gave me my exam, and my grade was D-.
Oh, my heart.
And then she said words that changed my life. She said, have you ever been tested for a learning difference? Nobody my age was. That those tests did not exist in the years I was in school. But the minute she said it, everything sort of started falling into place. And I ended up embarking, we're not speaking about dyslexia, which is another kind of learning difference. I was given a very serious battery of tests that went on for weeks and weeks. and diagnosed with severe ADHD and an extremely low reading comprehension. I'm in the 7. I will say this, I'm not embarrassed. My reading comprehension level is the 17th percentile.
Mm-hmm.
For me to read a book by you, I have to read every page 3 times, and I have to really work hard. And I've pretty much given up. If somebody talks to me about some wonderful book and it's 600 pages long, I can't afford that. I'm too old. There are too many books. And I say this because I'm sure there are many people, and there are people listening to this right now who also carry this. I will say too, that there's a kind of secret gift and a secret power, a superpower that comes with this, which is hyper focus. And it's why I've said for years, and it sounded kind of crazy, that I have been known to write a novel in 2 weeks. My novel, To Die For, was written in 2 weeks. Baby Love was written in 10 days. Those 2 weeks, I leave the planet. And there could be a fire raging next to me and I wouldn't know. And that too is a gift of ADHD. But reading, what you don't know about me is that I'm probably the least well-read person on this little platform here tonight. I try.
God. That is so brave of you to share, and also so brave isn't quite the right word. I mean, I think that it's brave because there is perhaps a worry about judgment or stigma in some way. But I think you're right that the things that people sometimes perceive as being like, oh, that must be really hard. It takes you a while to read a book. Also, as you said, it takes with one hand, but it gives something so incredible with the other hand. I know everybody who's a writer, it's like,
all have the gifts we've got. And we have the problems that we've got, the challenges that we've got. Mm-hmm. So this is mine. And I wish that I could read better, but I can't start trading lives. I like the life I have. And so I accept it. And I'm the daughter of extraordinarily well-educated people who really had an enormous amount of English literature memorized, and it flowed over our table. So the rhythms of language and literature were always around me. My sister, who's also a writer, is extraordinarily well read, and it was kind of a joke, within our family. Oh, Joyce doesn't read. Joyce can't read. But I'm so over shame. I'm seeing you, Vi, say, I love you for making us aware. I'm not about shame. If I was going around, kicking dogs and screaming at children, I'd be ashamed of myself. But no, I'll be honest. I have to tell you in our 2 minutes, there was a book critic for the Boston Globe. This is a Boston story, who called me up a couple of years back, and I had a book coming out, I guess, and she wanted to know what I was reading. And I panic when I get that question. I think, oh my God, because sometimes I'm just not reading, or I'm reading poetry, or listening to music. And so I thought up books that I loved, and I said them. And she said, that's odd. I called you 12 years ago and you said the same books. Those were those were the books I was going to name. And I didn't tell her the truth. I said, oh, I really like to reread books that I love. But I don't say that now. I tell the truth.
Bravo. This is the most beautiful interview. I mean, this whole interview is like a work of art. And I have interviewed you before. I've talked with you before. There's so many things I learned about you in your life that I did not know. Like, I'm just so grateful that you're spending this
One of these days, we're actually going to meet in person, Jenna.
Watch out, world. Watch out. We were supposed to meet at Sanibel last year, and then there was the hurricane. But you will all feel the gravitational force of the dance party that Joyce and I will have.
I don't want to leave this gathering without letting people know, because I get asked this question a lot. There are people who were such passionate lovers of Count the Ways, who, were expecting that the book that came out now would be the sequel to Count the Ways. And I think you're going to love this book, but it's not. So I do want you to know the sequel to Count the Ways has been written and will come out next May.
Okay.
Hold on. It's coming.
Okay, good. Because then we will get to have you back on, and the sequel to Count the Ways, which I also really
maybe we'll do it in real time. You think you would just come over to my house and we talk about that?
Whatever house you have.
I would make a pie. I would make a pie for that.
Oh, good. Okay, so I have lightning round questions that are about pie and travel, and
Yeah.
then we will let you go because unbelievably, this has been an hour, and I am shocked. Like it feels like it's been 10 minutes. Okay, you ready for your lightning round?
Yes.
Okay, okay. Favorite place to travel?
Oh, I'm already stumped. I haven't been there yet. I mean, no, I have no favorites. I don't have a favorite child of mine. I don't have a favorite book. I don't have a favorite musician. No, can't do that one.
Okay, what's the place you most want to travel to?
Um, oh, I'd love to go to Vietnam. I love to ride a bike, and I think because hills are a little bit iffy for me at the moment, I think Vietnam would be great for biking. I want to go to Greece. I want to go to India. I've been to India once, but not enough. I have lots of places I want to go.
Okay, we will all go with you. Are you a morning writer or an evening writer?
Total morning. That's my time. It's a little challenging in Paris because the night is so great. But yeah, 5 a.m. And what gets me out of my bed and to my laptop is that I can't wait to see how my story is going to end. And the only way I'm going to find out is if I write it. So I'm writing fast.
You know what? I'm giving up on my lightning round actually, because like that is just the best way to end an interview. Except I have to ask, favorite kind of pie?
Oh, whatever fruit is in season at that moment, because it's all about the freshness of the fruit. So in end of June, it's going to be strawberry rhubarb. In August, it's going to be July, August, it'll be blueberry, and September, October, it's going to be apple.
That's, I mean, literally my mouth is watering. I have to go eat now. Okay, everybody, you can buy from our stall on Bookshop. You can buy several.
Or Gibson's Booksellers in
yes, of course.
where I will be on July 15th, and I can sign them for you then. But even if you order them from Gibson's, I'll sign them.
Dude, I'm so coming. Like everybody who is in New England is coming to Gibson's on July 15th.
I'm not. Nobody's invited me to Boston, and I don't know why. I'm so ready to go.
We'll talk in the green room. Guys, you need
Okay.
to buy so many of these. Buy them for Mother's Day. Buy them, just wait, Mother's Day already happened. Buy them for Mother's Day next year. Buy them for Father's Day. Buy them for yourself.
Father's Day. This is a book for men too.
It's a book for everybody. And I love reading this so much. And everybody, I love talking to Joyce. You can see why I love that she writes books so quickly, because then I get to talk to her a lot. Thank you for
it doesn't always work that way, but
well, you kind of said
you forever, Jenna. So let's do it again.
Good. I cannot wait. We can't wait for Count the Ways to come out. Meanwhile, everybody get several copies of The Bird Hotel. Joyce, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Paris. We love you. We can't wait for you to come back. Everybody, thank you for joining us today on Friday Frontliner on the Blaze. We will see you next Friday. Happy reading, everybody. Have a great weekend.